About 2 or 3 years ago, I was working for a hospital, or rather the ladies' wing. It was a new addition added to it, and in order to get snacks and drinks, you had to leave the new wing and go into the main building to get the snacks. By then, I had already had my share of unexplained things. The older location I'm not familiar with, but you had to walk past some extra rooms, and they each had a small changing light in them. While walking past one, I looked into one and saw what looked like a bandaged up person, crawling out of the fitting like the girl from the Ring. At the new hospital, you had to walk up 3 floors with the face of the hospital being nothing but glass. I saw myself in the reflection and I jokingly said, "Hey, I'm just here for some snacks. I don't mean to disturb anyone, but please don't follow me. I just want some snacks." As soon as I said that, I looked back at my reflection and saw a tall black shadow walking up behind me. I turned around and looked down the stairs. There was no one. I looked at the glass and there was just myself. A few months later I quit, and I still think about this when I hear other people share their hospital stories. Another time, I was talking out the trash during the day when I saw what looked like a black shadow. Like when a cloud goes by, only it was the size of a grocery cart. I just saw it dark behind a car, and a few seconds later, some nurses came with a body and loaded them up into the ambulance. I'll never work for, or at, or near another hospital ever again. No, sir. After high school, I got my first job working at the local strip mall, Coles. I always thought I saw Juanita. I'd walk in and she'd walk out. Or I'd walk in and she'd be walking out and I'd turn around and go, "Oh, hey, that's Juanita. She was my high school crush." It was always like that, and when I'd go in to see her, she was never there, or a bunch of people got in the way. I don't know how long that happened, but a girl I went to school with came in one day, and I told her that I saw Juanita. She smiled at me, like I was crazy. That's when she told me that she had died in a car crash on her way to school. We got into a fight, or I did, because she was going back to her old school. I wanted her to stay, and I stormed out and never spoke to her again. She died in 2004. I looked her up around 2014-15 and found out where she was laid to rest. When I got there, the cemetery was huge. I just had a picture of a headstone. I got out of my car and said, "Hey guys, I don't mean to walk on your graves, but I'm trying to find my sweetheart. Any chance you can tell me where she's at?" I think that talking to them as if they're still alive shows some respect, or that I'm not trying to harm anyone. I don't know what it was, but it felt like, I can't explain it, but my eyes went towards this old stone and I only saw the back, and that was hers. She gave me this Bible workbook that has her handwriting. I only did one section when she gave it to me. I lost all her letters and some of her pictures. I cried and told her I loved her. After that, I never saw her again. It's 2022, about to be 2023, and I haven't gone back. I don't know if that's paranormal or where to even post it, but everyone thinks I'm crazy when I tell this story. I've had unusual dreams before, but last night's dream was very different. Most of it wasn't memorable, ordinary day-to-day stuff in my home. But for virtually the whole dream, there was a spirit or some sort that would linger near me. It spooked me a few times since it was quietly standing there, and I would get startled when I turned and it was right there, or suddenly noticed it was next to me, but it didn't give off any hostile vibes. Whenever I looked at it, even in surprise, it would just look back at me and nothing else. If I could put any word to the vibes it gave, it seemed a bit lonely and peaceful, and it stuck close throughout the whole dream. I'm used to working with nature spirits and having them around, but this spirit seemed very different. This spirit had a lanky, tall shadow body with a broken skull floating around the face area and a red, glowing heart in their chest. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but I work with Anubis, and I've had dreams about pets that have passed over, including one about carrying my late family's dog home after finding him lost somewhere. But this is new territory for me. I've been trying to figure out what to make of it ever since. A friend of mine suggested looking into Santa Muerte and Dia los Muertos after I showed them a quick drawing of the spirit, and suggested that since I'd visited Mexico somewhat recently, and that might have something to do with all this. It's also interesting that this dream happened right before 7 with Dia los Muertos coming up too. Has anyone else encountered a spirit like this? Could they be a ghost or lost soul, or some other kind of spirit? What can I do to help them? This event happened when I was about 14 or 15 years old. I'd always been close to one of my brothers, and we would hang out for the majority of the day. Since he was a kid, he had always liked to play with fire in the backyard, with papers and such. One night we were in our bedroom, and he started to play with his lighter while I was playing on the computer. All of a sudden he yelped with amazement. "Hey, check this out!" What began to happen was the flame of the lighter began to liquefy and run down his hands as it was burning. It would disappear as it was about to fall to the floor. Every time he hit the lighter, it happened again and again. He asked me if I wanted to try. Although I was amazed, there was more fear of the unknown and denied his offer. A few minutes of playing with this liquid fire and the lights of all my house go out. I thought to myself, what a coincidence that the fire began to act differently and the lights went out. I shrugged it off, and I assumed my brother too. I asked him to turn on the lighter, but he says it won't. After a few minutes, he noticed a dark orb floating over our bed. Both of us were amazed at the sight, so I asked him if he could see it too. It was very odd, since the whole house was pitch black, yet in the darkness there was a darker orb. He shouted in amazement, "Yes!" The orb started to behave differently. It playfully began to bounce somewhere the bed was supposed to be. It bounced up and down, and we were enjoying the show. Suddenly, its trajectory began to change. From up and down, it did a triangular circuit. From the bed, it would bounce to the wall, and then it would go to one of those old school big fat TVs. Bed to wall to TV. Bed to wall to TV. I don't know if any of you have done this before, but when you hit one of those old TVs hard with your fist, they make this huge weird sound. Anyways, when the orb would hit the TV, it made that exact obloid bowing sound. It kept doing this for a few minutes until it began to turn up the speed. Faster and faster until the orb hit the TV and made its last boring sound. The orb had gone through the TV. We couldn't see it anymore. At that exact moment, a vase breaks in my mum's room. Her room is a few feet away from ours. When the vase broke in the darkness, both my mother and sister screamed. Shortly after the lights came back, I looked at my brother perplexed, wondering what had just happened and if it was connected. We walked to our mother's room. The first thing we saw was the broken vase dripping water. We picked up this mess and didn't tell our family because they would be scared. To this day, I do not know what that was, why it played with was, and where it went. It never happened again. All I can say is, when paranormal stuff happens, it's there. You can see it. Not in the corner of your eye. You can close and open your eyes, and it still exists until it leaves. A lot of things happened in our lives until my brother moved out. I think it followed him since he kept reporting stuff in all the houses he moved to. When I was in high school, I always walked around my town after a night, whether it would be friends or by myself, and was supposed to be home around 9. I lived in a pretty small neighbourhood, where there were often a lot of sketchy people walking around at night, so I never took the same route home at the end of the night. One night when I was 14, I was walking past this old historical building that used to be a hotel and is just kind of creepy. As I was walking, I got a phone call from an unknown number. My friends and I were always playing pranks calling each other, so I answered it. The voice was really deep and honestly scared me, because it didn't sound like anything my friends could try to mimic. But I figured it was a prank, so I was looking around as they're saying creepy stuff like, "I'm right behind you. I'm watching you." There was literally no one there. The cars were all just the ones that were always there from the few people that lived on the street. And it was a very open street with not a lot of places to hide behind that anyone could have been watching me without me seeing them. I hung up and kept walking, thinking it was one of my friends, when I got another call. Just like before, a weird voice, but this time I was laughing. I was trying to figure out who it was, but I got annoyed, so I hung up again, thinking one of my friends would own up later. Then my phone rang again. But when I went to answer it, my phone wasn't ringing, and it sounded like it was actually coming from the bush next to me, which was too small for someone to be hiding in. I didn't have one of the regular iPhone ringtones. It was a specific one I had bought, so I knew it was mine. I booked it and ran home. I texted all my friends telling them whoever it wasn't funny. None of them owned up to it, and when I thought about it, I never took the same way home, or even went home at the same time. So no one could have planned that, and with the ringtone and everything, none of it made sense. To this day, I don't know what it was, but any time I'm home and I drive past that building, I think of it. Anyone have any thoughts on what that could have been? First, let me start off by saying that I'm the youngest of 5. To tell you my story, we must travel back some 30 years. I'll begin by telling you from a young age, I've always seen things I could never explain. From the things you catch out the corners of your eyes, to shadows, to even shadow figures looking at me from around corners. Strangely, I don't ever remember being afraid. I guess because I never felt any harm or danger. Peaceful, I would have to describe it, because I felt watched over. I grew up in a small 3-bedroom apartment with my mother and 2 of my siblings, one of my brothers and one of my sisters. So being the youngest in the house, I wasn't allowed to sleep or even be in my siblings' bedrooms. You're too young. I need my privacy, they would say, leaving me around 7 years old at the time to sleep in the living room. The furniture was arranged in a way to where the sofa was in line with the bathroom. This will be relevant in a second. One night, I remember that it was just me, my mother, and her friend, wink wink. It was years ago, so I can't recall where my brother and sister were. Needless to say, they were not at home. So now it's bedtime, and there's just the 3 of us. My mother and her friend are in her room, and I'm on the sofa. Between the sofa and bathroom was a hallway that connected the bedrooms, where I used its light as a nightlight. So it was well lit. As I lie there starting to fall asleep, I begin to hear things. Then eventually I begin to hear a lady call out my name. The first time or 2, I paid no mind. But after I heard it a few more times, I began to get butterflies in my stomach. At first, I begin to just look into the living room, to which I have a full view of where I'm laying. I see nothing. But when she calls out one more time, I realise where the voice is coming from. In the bathroom's doorway is where she stood, a lady in all white. She was faceless with bright golden lights surrounding her, and she seemed to just be floating there while her white dress moved as if being blown by a slight breeze. There she was, her arms reaching out, calling out my name in a soft and pleasant voice. As a child, it frightened the hell out of me, leading me to scream at the top of my lungs once I realised what was happening. By the time my mother ran out to see what was wrong, she was gone. I never saw her again after that, but occasionally I do hear the voice call out my name. I rented a room for my aunt on 2 different occasions. She has her own house, and it's just her and a bunch of dogs. We get along great, and just hang out and talk a lot of times. She's a Wiccan, and I have an avid fascination with the occult. When I was about 20, I moved into the spare bedroom. She created a couple of her dogs in her bedroom upstairs because certain dogs couldn't be alone with others, so she could go out and grab a drink with her boyfriend. I decided I was going to start unpacking and set up my computer, etc. As I was sitting in my room at the end of the hall, directly under my aunt's room, from down the hall and off the loft, I heard a low, rumbling, growling noise. I go up to check, and it's one of her dogs, low to the ground and staring out the door, intently growling. I'd never seen her do this before. She perked up when I came around the corner and seemed relieved to see me. I gave her pets to calm her down and went back downstairs. Then she started doing it again. After the third time, I decided I would just ignore it for a bit. Then she started barking like crazy. So again, I ran upstairs, calmed her down, and went back downstairs. Well, after a few times of low growling, then barking, eventually letting her out of the cage and hanging out with her for a bit, I gave up. It's been about an hour like this, about the amount of time my aunt's been gone. Finally, I'm like, whatever. I'm just going to let her growl and bark. I've searched around the house and property at this point in case of intruders. Nothing. So I'm setting up my computer, ignoring her increasing aggressiveness. It's then that I think I hear two men talking up in the loft. It's faint, but dramatic enough for me to go again once to check. The voices fade as I come to the end of the hall and pass under the loft. I go up and check anyways, calm down the dog. Nothing. Her father in the crate next to it is also staring intently out of the room onto the loft, but he's been completely quiet. This is uncharacteristic for him as well. He's usually the loud one. This happens again. The more I try to ignore it, the more I'm thinking there must be a radio somewhere. This didn't make a lot of sense, as we rarely had devices on unless we were using them, which wasn't common. Sure enough, after searching the house top to bottom again, nothing. Finally, I'm frustrated. I go back to setting up my computer and unpacking. Dead set, I would ignore all noises. Must be in my head or something. I don't know. She's just upset because she's wondering where her person is or something. Trying to write everything off as something explainable. I continue. The conversation fading back in again. I swear I can almost make out the words now. So I listened. Then, from directly in my open doorway, mere feet away around the corner, I hear what sounds like a child saying, "Hello?" I spring up, grab my firearm, and clear the frickin' house and property like a one-man SWAT team. Voices fade out, and I exit the room. Again, nothing. I let the dog out of the crate and go sit down at the kitchen table to have a beer and wait for my aunt to return. The dog sat close at my feet the whole time. I hear faint voices from time to time over the next half hour. My aunt gets home and asks why she's out of her crate, and I told her everything. She aggressively yells, "Knock it off!" and has a seat. Apparently, she's been experiencing things like this for months whenever she's in the house alone, and never thought to mention it. Our family has a sensitivity to stuff like this, but I guess she assumed that only applied to the women in the family. It's something I've known I've had for a long time, but until that moment, she was adamant that because I'm a guy, I'm not as sensitive to these things as her and her sisters. She then informed me if I hear knocking at the front door to check, as opposed to just saying, "Come in." Apparently, something had been trying to trick her into inviting it in as well. I think she may have played with something she wouldn't have out of ignorance. Something I have plenty of experience with now, but back then, it really freaked me out. I know more about all this stuff now, and I've had other experiences throughout my own life, both before and after this event. But this is one of the first ones that really convinced me that our world around us is much stranger than it seems. So an ex of mine had a cat. His name was Oliver, and he was a cat that looked like Garfield. Whenever I went to her house, he was my cat. He had to sleep wherever I slept. I took care of him whenever I was at her place. He loved me and was attached to me for some reason. Well, Oliver had an excessive build-up of urinary crystals, and that put him down, sadly. Fast forward a year later, I live close to the TCU campus in Fort Worth, Texas. There was one house I didn't like walking by late at night when the house was unrented, because I was being watched by the entity that lived there. Whenever it was rented, though, it never watched me. So I knew some frat guys that lived there, and I would ask them about the ghost, to no avail. 3 months into the school year, they left their doors unlocked and went to the bars. Someone broke in, and they decided to move the next day. After they were moved into the new place, one of them asked me to go to the house at night to check for their laptop cord. Big mistake. There was a hallway to the bedrooms that led into the kitchen, but before the kitchen was an entryway into the living room where French doors used to be. As I was walking through the hall to the kitchen, I felt something on my leg. It was a smoky white cat, and it started to disappear as it walked around my leg. It also had an aura of warmth and love to it. I believe it was Oliver warning me. As soon as it disappeared, I felt from the living room an evil energy, and as I turned to look, I saw 2 red eyes and a feeling of it wanting me dead. So I got the hell out of there. Oh, and his flipping cord wasn't there, so I went there for nothing and got scared. So here we go. I was around the age of 14 to 16. I was playing GTA Online with some friends on the Xbox 360 when all of a sudden my internet cut out. No big deal, I'll just wait and text my friends what's going on. I look at my phone and it's stuck on 1:47 AM. I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to get it off of that screen, like it was frozen. I realised my TV and all the sound just stopped, like nothing but me was making a sound. I decided to go out into the living room to see if my stepdad at the time was on the couch and see if he was experiencing the same thing. But he was asleep, which kind of scared me more because he always snores in his sleep. I didn't even hear him breathing. I kept poking him and asking him to wake up and nothing. There was a single light on in the kitchen. I walked over to it and noticed out of everything, it was the only thing moving. It flickered a few times. I started getting a very bad vibe. But like an idiot I was, I decided to go outside to see if anything else was weird. Everything outside was frozen in place. Animals, insects, cars. It was like I was the only one moving. I looked at the sky, and it was like I could see everything in the sky. I never could see as many stars as before. I noticed one star was moving, and it was like it was moving towards me. It just kept getting bigger and bigger as it came close and still no sound. Fear took over me and something inside me screamed. In my room, my heart was pounding. I tried turning off my light, but it wouldn't do everything I tried. It wouldn't turn off. Then all of a sudden, I hear what sounds like a generator going off and everything is working and back to normal. I'm still freaking out. I look at my phone and immediately start calling my best friend I was playing GTA with and ask him how long was I gone. He was very confused. He said I was only gone for a few minutes. Freaked out still, I get a knock on my door and my stepdad comes in. I just had a strange dream where you were talking to me and telling me to wake up and poking me. Was that what you were doing? Are you okay? I just said, yeah, I'm fine. And no, I didn't do that. I was just freaked out and didn't know what to do. So I just said I'm going to go to bed. I couldn't sleep. Nothing made sense. Couldn't sleep for weeks after that. Never had it happen to me again though. I don't know what happened or if it was a dream, but it felt so real and I still remember every little detail from that night. So my family believes that drugs and alcohol bring about bad spirits and bad energy in general. Even horror movies do according to them. But I was in grade 5 and was around 11 years old. It was just me and my mother home in my 2-story suburban house, as my stepdad was working nights, being home around 6 AM. Unfortunately, my mother was a heavy drug user at the time, and during those times, the paranormal activity in the house always got very active. and at this point, she was in it deep for a couple of weeks. It was around 5 a.m. or so, and I was awake in the downstairs basement watching TV, on my phone, doing normal stuff, just hanging out. All of a sudden, I hear my mum come running down the stairs quite quickly and abruptly stop at the bottom of the staircase. I was like, what? She then proceeded to say, "Run to the bathroom, now!" in a very strong tone, which honestly frightened me, because I knew she wasn't herself when she was abusing drugs like that. But I just thought, okay, whatever. It's probably just the drugs making her act that way. Don't try to make her mad. So even though I was quite frightened, I got up and started walking to the downstairs basement, which is located right across the bottom of the staircase. But as I was walking to the bathroom to her, I passed a wall where we had a huge horizontal mirror. And in the mirror on the other side of the room, I saw what we call the man in the grey suit. I've never looked at him with my own eyes. It's always been a reflection. I just kept walking and acted like I didn't see him at all. He was only in the corner of my eye that time, but he was there. From what I can recall, he's a very tall man, as tall as our ceiling, which is about 8 feet high. He wears a suit, I guess grey since it's in his name, but I cannot exactly remember. But I do know he wears a suit. From what else I can recall, he doesn't have a face at all, or I've never seen it. No one has ever caught a glimpse of him. From what I can tell, he just likes to stand in corners then disappear. He has a very, very strong presence, and once you see him, you're immediately filled with fear. Although I still live in the same house, and my bedroom is right beside that downstairs bathroom, I've not seen him since that encounter. I'm not sure if he's a demon or just some sort of entity. What do you think? He's a hot topic in my home. So I may have met a demon. This is something that at the time just left me confused. But after getting more info as a teenager, left me a bit scared and wondering what would have happened if I didn't speak with my mom first. So here we go. My sister hopped off the bus before me, and I moved my short child legs as fast as I could after her, as she went to our house next to the one that served at the bus stop. The moment she stepped inside, she slammed the door shut in my face, and before I could even wrap my tiny hands around the doorknob, she had clicked the deadbolt into place. I screamed her name and beat my fists against the door, but to no avail. I was locked out and was going to have to wait for my mom to get home in an hour. This was a regular occurrence, so while I was crying angry tears, I went to sit on our porch swing and started to fill out my homework. Just a worksheet or two, counting coins and telling time. We lived in a small rural town with a population of maybe 600. The type of place where in the 90s, no one locked their doors in the day, and you knew everyone. My great aunt and uncle actually lived next door, and I could have waited at their house, but the weather was nice and I was mad at my sister. I was going to sit out here and brood. The fact you knew everyone in a place like this is why I felt unnerved when a young boy about my age with curly black hair came up our porch and sat on the swing beside me. I didn't recognise him, and he had honest-to-God white feathered wings. The house we grew up in was haunted by past relatives, so I didn't even question the wings at the time. I had seen many strange figures when awoken in the dead of night, by strange sounds. But still, I had never seen this one, and was staring at him like, "Excuse me, who the fuck are you?" But he ignored my obviously questioning stare, until I actually spoke up to state the question politely. Not sure I actually knew the F word at that age. He seemed a little taken aback when I first spoke, but introduced himself as Valak and began to converse easily with me. I quickly felt at ease talking with him, and as a child, and even adult who will talk up anyone, this itself was not strange. I'm like a dog. Strangers are just friends. I haven't met in most instances. I introduced myself and we talked about things that happened that day, and about our pets. He spoke of his, which I thought was named Dragon and might be a dog. When he asked me if I wanted to meet Dragon, being the good kid who didn't wander off unexpectedly, I said I had to ask my mom, whose car was pulling into the driveway. She came up to the porch, and I told her my sister locked me out, before asking if I could go meet my new friend's pet. Her eyes skimmed the porch and right over the boy I was motioning to, without even pausing on him, before she said I could, after we sorted out my sister, as she forced a bright smile on her face. A smile I learned later was what she gave when encouraging my imaginative play. She probably thought at that moment I created an imaginary friend to entertain myself while locked out of the house. Fair assumption, but I could tell pretend from reality, and I was sure he was real. My mom went to unlock the door as I went to her side, and she asked me my friend's name. I told her before whispering I thought he might be a guardian angel, since he has wings, and he did come at a time when I was alone and upset. My mom's face went completely white, and when that door was open, she practically threw me inside and slammed it shut behind us, before finding a bottle of holy water and basically showered me in it. I was hurt and confused, as I was given no explanation for this, and wasn't allowed outside alone for weeks. I never spoke of him again, not wanting to upset my mom, though I saw sometimes I caught a glimpse of him in other places. I had no answers for what happened that day until I was a teenager. Me and my friends were terrorising the local Books-A-Million when trying to be the fake edgy teens we were. We found a demonology book and wanted to peruse it. I opened up towards the back to the V's since it was basically a demon dictionary. I wanted to point out how this was before even the first Conjuring movie came out, and had only heard the name from this person's lips. And I don't even know if I was subconsciously looking for it, but when I saw Valak in that section, the memory of that boy came back full force, and the description. While not a direct quote, since it's been years since I saw the book, was a demon that looked like a child with angel wings, and rode a two-headed dragon. I don't know if I actually met a demon that day. I'm not sure how much I believe in those things, but the coincidences made my blood run cold. And now it's been over a decade since I saw that entry, and I still sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd gone with him that day. And the explanation for my mom's reaction? She would have come across it at least once. Her and her mom were really into Christian theology. We inherited many binders on the topic when her mom passed. My mom recognised that name and description and truly feared for my safety that day. So I have a teddy bear that's haunted. I've had it for decades and I'm comfortable with this spirit. I even have a good idea on who it is. An old friend who was killed quite tragically as a child. While thinking of good experiences and also wondering if I'd be able to catch any of his normal shenanigans on film, easier said than done. He's an intelligent haunting, and while every active in person, even around strangers, he does know when he's being filmed and becomes camera shy. But I found an odd trait. He won't touch newer things. I first thought of the fact he used to like flipping lights during movies. He won't if you personally ask him if he wants to watch a movie with you though. But ever since I moved into a place with box switches and dimmers, he won't touch it. Then I realised he had this weird no-touching behaviour with other things that are essentially newer things he'd normally mess with. Like he used to randomly make songs skip on my MP3, flipping to songs that were more upbeat when I was obviously upset, but not after I got an iPod. He'll mess with my record player to this day though, and it's a newer one I received as a gift a couple years back. He would knock landline phones off cradles, but never messes with a cell phone. He'll knock books off the shelf, but always ones I've had for years, never newer ones. He also prefers hardbacks, which are a weird trait, but they handle the abuse better than paperbacks. I've started wondering if he doesn't mess with them because they're new, especially new technology. Has anyone who's had a particularly active or playful spirit like mine seen this sort of avoidant behaviour? I'm not looking to find an answer so I can change my environment. He's never acted temperamental over the changes in the modern home, but I am curious if there's a reason for this. So I grew up with the paranormal stories in my family, and a few times I experienced some of my own. So my parental grandfather told me this story when I was younger. He was Lieutenant Colonel in Yugoslav Air Force and a test pilot for new planes. He was a very smart man, really a man of science, but his whole life believed in everything paranormal. He lived half an hour away from us, but 2 streets from my house, we have a small vineyard with a cottage where my grandfather spent his every day since he retired. The cottage is constructed in such a way that it has a ground floor and a first floor, but there's only one room on each floor. There isn't a way to go up on the first floor from the bottom one. You entered every floor from outside. From the upper one, there's a small balcony in front of the entrance with a staircase leading up to it. So up until then, my grandfather from time to time slept there when he worked there late. This evening, he decided to sleep there and get up early to work on the vines. He laid down on the couch on the bottom floor and fell asleep. At some point in the night, he was woken up by the sound of footsteps in the room above him. He thought that someone broke in, so he reached for his service pistol on the table beside him. The moment he touched him, laughing began. He described it like a witch laugh, crazed woman laugh, exactly like witches laugh in the movies, and it was loud. He just froze with his hands on his pistol and couldn't move because of fear. He said he lay there for hours, and the thing upstairs never stopped laughing. For the end of the story, I'm not sure. Either everything stopped when the first morning rooster began crowing, or when it dawned, but he immediately left the cottage and went home. Never again in his life did he sleep there. He didn't even stay there past sundown. As soon as the sun became orange, he would leave. We built this house and were the first ones to ever live in it. Completely brand new. You wouldn't ever think that a brand new house could be haunted. I've heard footsteps, seen things move, turn on, turn off on their own, flickering lights, electricity malfunction, shadow figures, and full-on apparitions. Above all, I never felt comfortable in the house. I dreaded being there by myself. I never went into the basement, and I always felt like someone or something was watching me. I would always sleep with the lights on in my bedroom, and would have a new encounter or experience on a weekly basis. My entire family had experiences, my dad the worst. Our neighbourhood would get together for a few months to drink and hang out. One night, the neighbours across the street from us were pretty boozy and started to mention how they think their house is haunted. Everyone's faces went cold. Everyone had a story, something to share. One neighbour had found a totem buried in their backyard and had a priest come bless it. Years later, my dad got a new job at a local brewery as a tour guide right down the street, about a quarter mile from our neighbourhood. Through training, he learned that the entire area was once an Indian burial ground. The grounds go for miles and miles, completely covering our neighbourhood. I'm not really sure how or why no one else knew about this from our neighbourhood. I have to wonder if the county tries to keep it under wraps, so real estate sales in the area don't completely tank. I want to start off by saying I'm very susceptible to the afterlife. It doesn't scare me, and I've experienced different encounters my entire life. Specifically with my relatives though, they always visit me when I'm sleeping, or so I think. My grandparents, my aunt, past kitties, etc. And I'm always pretty sure it's just them checking in and seeing how I'm doing. My uncle passed away about 3 months ago. It was a terrible and unexpected death, and no one got to say their goodbyes. I was never close with my uncle, but after his passing, I thought maybe he was trying to show me signs. He was a huge fan of the state college where I'm from and would tailgate at every home game every year. Where I'm living currently is not the state I'm from, and seeing my hometown state college on sweatshirts or baseball caps or bumper stickers would be very uncommon. But weeks following his passing, I would see the school name everywhere. I even saw it on the same Audi he used to drive once. So crazy. It never freaked me out, but I saw it as a sign. Over the past few nights, I've been dreaming about him, but the odd part is that he's in the dream, but he never says anything. A few nights ago, I dreamt that him and my aunt and my cousin were eating at the restaurant I used to work at. But it was one of those server nightmares where I was so busy and couldn't keep up. But I would see him in the corner of my eye and he was just at the table staring at me. Last night, I dreamt I was at a memorial service for his passing. And I was sitting next to my mom, but on the other side, he was there. At one point, he had his arm around me and I was so confused because I could tap my mom and say, "Look, it's Uncle, he's sitting right next to me." And she would look at me funny. But then I looked back over and he was still there. Again, he wouldn't say anything to me, just look at me and have his arm around me. I think that's the most confusing, is when my aunt or grandparents visit me in my dreams. They're always asking me how I'm doing and we have conversations. But with my own uncle, he just stares at me, doesn't say anything. I wonder what that means. Do you think it's really him trying to reach out, but maybe he's stuck in purgatory and therefore can't talk to me? So I live with my mom, and we both have been having paranormal experiences our whole lives. I have tons and tons of stories that tend to baffle people, but those are from the past. What's happening now is so different than before. The majority of these things are very simple. Things like lighters or clothes disappearing, then reappearing on my bed every single time. Random things swapping and just general sounds of footsteps occasionally. Now, it's amped up. Majorly. It's to the point where both my mum and myself have to ensure it's the other, using the washroom. The toilet will flush, the lid will make sounds like it's being lifted or put down. The taps turn on and the door makes noise. Some of the other things happening. I constantly hear my mum yelling my name, and whenever I respond, she said nothing. This happens vice versa, so it's not just me. Someone constantly knocks and scratches at my door at night. Some nights it's 1 or 2 knocks, a single scratch or something small. Then other nights it's full of scratching and knocking. Every single time I've gone to check who it is or if it could be my cat, and she's passed out on the couch. Every time. And it's happened with her in my room. This happens nightly in some form. When I'm home alone, I often see the shadow of and hear footsteps under my door. Very obviously human, and again, my cat has been asleep or with me. Both my mum and myself see things moving out of the corners of our eyes often. Very often. A very thick mist appeared in my mum's room when I was with my boyfriend for the weekend. She was able to fully wake up and stare at it for a decent amount of time. On the 3rd or 4th night my boyfriend stayed at my place, he heard 2 women talking in my living room. My headboard is basically against the couch, considering how thin our walls are. So he was able to hear quite well from the other room. Honestly, this is all I can think of off the top of my head, but there's more. I'm extremely open to the spirit world, and I have been since I was a child. The energy I feel here feels so familiar, almost like I've felt it forever. It's not menacing or bad energy, but it doesn't feel like it could be something like my dad who passed. It's not negative, but it's not positive. It does feel like it's following us though. My mum was asleep one night in her bedroom, which was at the very end of the apartment. She tends to wake up every night around 3 a.m. and has done so since she was a child. One night, she woke up and froze. All she could see was this fairly large cloud of mist that she described as somewhat ball-shaped. She was able to look at it for quite a while, fully woken up, blinking many times, yet it was still there. She estimates it was about 2 minutes that it was there. We have no clue what this was, but touch wood, it hasn't been seen since. Oftentimes, I'll hear what sounds like my mum getting home. I hear the door, her keys, some footsteps, and occasionally I hear her sitting down on the couch. It's happened 3 times in the last few hours alone. The first time was so loud, I genuinely brought a baseball bat to my living room with me after calling for my mum. The second I opened my bedroom door, gone. Silent. Nada. I know this one is fairly common for people, but it just happens excessively here. My mum has also heard me come home before. We've both even heard each other's voices, very faintly. I'll start this one at the beginning, when we moved in. I can't remember the specific incidents that took place when we first got here, since I've always been so used to noises and movements, etc. All I know is that eventually, it's been getting more frequent. Because of this, my mum and I tried some automatic writing. I'm not sure if what I do is considered automatic writing, but I'll give it a quick rundown. Basically, I just sat in silence with my book, a pen in my hand, and my mum sat near me. She asks questions such as names, yes or no questions, you get the point. I just sort of white light myself, and whatever I write, I write. I always ensure I've taken every precaution to protect myself and not let anything in. The first time we tried this in this apartment, I got a lot of things written down. Most were scribbles or random yes or no answers that we obviously didn't know the order of. The main thing I wrote was the name Edwin. We try not to acknowledge this name, but for purposes of the story, I kind of have to. To many, that would be the be-all and end-all. You've got the name, you know how to address it to get activity to chill, and you're just no longer curious because you have somewhat of an answer. For us, this almost made it worse. You see, when my mum was younger, she would use a Ouija board somewhat often. What name did she receive multiple times? You guessed it. She was talking to Edwin. She refused to tell me this name my entire life. Then when she saw I had written it down, she went white. There was zero way for me to know this name at all. After getting this name and moving on with our night, my mum had an odd dream. She would only describe it as the feeling of not being able to sleep, but while she was sleeping, she saw a man, but that was about it. That was also all she told me about the dream, as that was all she could remember. She couldn't even fully picture the guy she saw. One night, maybe another 2 nights later, I was just about to go to sleep when it seemed like something was yelling at me to draw. I've never felt this before, but I picked up a pencil and sketchbook from beside my bed and just drew a man's face. While I do love art and would consider myself an artist, I cannot draw people for the life of me. When I told my mum about this the next morning and showed her the drawing, it was the man from her dream. She instantly recognised him, and like I said, I can't draw people if you pay me. Things continued like normal and didn't calm down or ramp up. For a while, we thought it was because we had seen him and he was content being seen. But that's when the female presence became more prominent. Almost as if she felt ignored now that we had seen the man. We started trying to figure her out, but we got one name. Edwina. So at this point, we were at a slight loss. We weren't sure if there were 2 entities taking on similar names, one taking on 2, one copying the other. Nothing was clear. The activity continued and wasn't any more or less prominent after we acknowledged the other entity. Everything continues today. While writing this, my stereo came on, played a few notes, and then promptly shut off. I appreciate everyone's help and advice, but we've learned to live with these specific entities. Though we're okay with them, there are others I have stories about as well. I also have tons of stories from one of my old houses that was insanely active. Years ago, when I was about 16, my friend X and I were attached to the hip, as most teens are with their best friends. X's mother spent most of her nights drinking and staying at men's homes. She hardly ever came home at night, so X and I always stayed at her house to take care of her little sister, Kay. I remember when I first started spending most nights at X's house. I thought it odd that she shared a room with Kay, even when there was an extra room, so they could each have their own rooms. But I dismissed it because it really didn't matter. Anyway, one night I was sleeping in X's bed, sharing a room with Kay. X had slept in their mother's bed that night. I was woken up by Kay shaking my arm and whispering to me, "Mom needs to talk to you, she's downstairs." So I got up and followed Kay out of the door. She ran ahead, and by the time I rounded the corner to the stairs, she was gone. Made it downstairs to an empty dark living room. Checked the equally dark and empty kitchen. No Kay, no Mom. Confused as heck, I walked back upstairs, peeked on X, who was passed out, still, and then went back into their room just to see Kay passed out in her bed. I went up to her and noticed her lips were blue and she wasn't breathing. Panicking, I started shaking her and shouting for X. She ran in just in time to see Kay take one deep breath. Her colour returned, and she'd stirred a little before resuming normal breathing and continuing to sleep. Absolutely shaken, I explained to X what had happened, that Kay had woken me up, and I watched her go toward the stairs, just to end up vanishing. All X really had to say was, "Yeah, that's why I sleep near her. She stopped breathing in her sleep a few times." I live with my girlfriend and her 3 kids. I'm spirit sensitive, and the house has always kind of felt off to me. I've had several encounters over the years. Recently, my girlfriend has been seeing shadow figures, mainly upstairs in the doorway to our bedroom and by the kitchen. She said she wasn't scared when she saw it and assumed it was her uncle. He passed recently, so she was optimistic that it had been him just visiting her. But the energy feels more malevolent to me. The kids were at their dad's one night, and we kept hearing what sounded like a child's cough coming from her son's room. Very creepy. The kids have been sick for the past week, so we were used to hearing coughing, but they weren't home. Our neighbour told us that one of the previous occupants of the house had an older boyfriend. He was mowing the front yard when he had a heart attack and died right by our tree. It makes me wonder if it might be home. Our laundry room is down in the basement. I always get the feeling that something is watching me. I told her that the energy felt darker. It's a very heavy presence, and I feel this suffocating feeling when I'm downstairs in her daughter's room. We had some sage, so I opened up all the windows and smudged the basement. She said she'd gone downstairs before I got home from work, but I'm not sure how much of it she actually did. Downstairs, I still get a creepy feeling, but the energy feels somewhat lighter. I'm just worried now that we might have pissed it off. Upstairs, I get the uneasy feelings now. She hasn't seen any figures since we saw her the other day. Would doing this upset the spirits? What should we do next?
My family is different. We were raised Christian, but a lot of the family did witchcraft. Not your typical witchcraft. Most of us either followed into it or put that aside. I believe in things that most don't, but I don't practice anything. My brother, on the other hand, went into it hard. With that being said, so I must have been like 23 or 24. I was living with my brother and grandma. My brother, at the time, would leave the house and not come back for days. He had a massive DVD collection. When I was bored, I would either pick his door, or if the key was available, I would use that. On this day, the key was there. So I went in and grabbed a bunch of DVDs and locked the door because I didn't want him knowing I was in there. I watched like 2 movies, smoked some, and then got paranoid. So I went to place the movies back in his room. I closed the door, locked the door. When I locked the door, I heard a sound and was like, what the fuck? So I unlocked the door and the door slammed into the closet doors. The way the room was, the door opens to the left. On the right of the door was his double door closet. So if the closet doors are open, he can't get out of the room. Being blazed, I thought maybe something fell in the closet. So I pushed one closet door closed and made my way in. I looked around and realised there was nothing. I was like, whatever. Close the closet, exit the room, lock the door. I heard the same noise. Thinking I'm just being paranoid, I unlocked the door and once again, the closet doors were open. I push one door closed and make my way in. Looking around, only this time, I felt the coldest shiver ever in my life. I was like, fuck that, and I'm out. Exit the room, lock the door, and that's when I hear the closet door slam against the room door. Not gonna lie, it made me jump. I immediately ran to my grandma and asked if he was there. She replies, no. I was like, you sure? She was like, yep. So now I'm like, this motherfucking got playing with my emotions. I unlocked the door, closed the closet door, and went in. I'm like, bruh, stop playing with me. I know you're in here. Nothing. I start looking around. I look under the bed, and so I'm not scared if he jumps out. I yell, ha, muffa. There was nothing. I look behind the bed. Ha, nothing. Behind the curtains, nothing. I'm like, well, this motherfucker in the closet. I open the closet door. Ha, nothing. I move the clothes around. Nothing. I'm now convinced I'm lit and it's just my imagination. I repeat the process. This time I didn't lock the door. I ran to my Gma, made her out to get out of bed and took her to this room. I tell her to listen. I lock the door and the closet doors fly open, slamming against the room door. She's like, what was that? I told her and explained what was happening. She's like, well, he's in there. I push the closet door closed, take her in and show her the room. She's like, something must have put pressure on the door. We exit the room, I lock it and it happens again. I'm like, she turns, slaps me in the face and says, keep that kind of shit to yourself, and walks away. I push the closet closed, go in. I'm like, whatever you are, you're not welcomed here. I exit the door, lock the door. This time I hear one closet door open. Curious, I open the door. The closet door furthest from the room door was open. I close it, and that's when his lights turn off. Mind you, this whole time, the lights were on. That scared the bejesus out of me. I turn them on, exit, lock the door. I hear it again. My dumb lit ass goes to look. Closet doors are open. Lights off, I push in, close the closet doors and look in. The room was a lot darker. Almost like you couldn't see anything, even with the light coming from the hall. I turn on the light and run out scared shitless. I leave the door unlocked. Around 11 p.m, my brother comes home. I rush to him and I'm like, you want to see something creepy? He looks at me with this pale face and says no. I'm like, well, you're gonna anyway. I take him to his room and he's like, why is the key in the lock? I come clean and tell him the truth. I tell him to lock the door. He looks at me and says, I don't want to. I squint my eyes, now knowing he knows something. He makes a big fuss but locks the door. We both hear that shit and he starts spilling the beans. He's like some voodoo guy he knows gave him an original Ouija board. He's like, since he got it, he was having nightmares and hearing things. So we left the house for days. I'm like, so you leave it here and don't say shit? He's like, I thought it was in my head. He took it and I thought he left with it. Instead, this motherfucker puts it in another closet that has a skeleton key lock. Don't say shit. Leave the house for another 5 days. He comes home and spends like 3 days in the house. For those 3 days, everyone is hearing a doorknob jiggling, but we don't know where it's coming from. I ask him, yo, you got rid of that shit, right? He turns super slow and says with this stupid look, no, I put it in the small closet. When he says that, we hear the doorknob jiggle harder. So we go to the closet and you can see the doorknob moving. The thing with that closet is that there is no inside doorknob. I'd like to go in there and get rid of it. This is like I'm scared. What if it tries to eat me or take my soul? I'm like, well, if that's your fate, it is what it is. He takes it back to the old voodoo guy. That's when the old voodoo guy tells him that he found that Ouija board in the Amityville house in the late 70s, early 80s. After that day, my brother stopped doing his weird stuff and started going to church. Till this day, every time I talk about it, I feel cold shivers and get goosebumps.